What's up, YouTube? It's Anthony from Bad Dog Homestead. On today's video, we're going to be building this wall-mounted end table, which we made out of 2x6s and a light that we got on Amazon. This build took us about 4 hours, so stick around for this video and we'll show you how we did it. So first I grabbed a couple of 2x6s that I cut long. These will be the bottom shelf. These are twice the length of what I'll need for one shelf because I'll be building 2 of them. You will want to leave these a few inches long because after we glue them up, then you will cut them to their final length. You will need to either run your 2x6s through your table saw or a planer or joiner, so that way the edge that will be glued together will be very flat and very straight. This is critical for the strength of the glue joint. Most 2x6s that you get are going to have very rough edges on them, and they're meant for structural framing. Now that I have my wood glue and clamps, I'm just checking the 2 pieces of wood to see which faces line up the best. Even though I've run these through a planer, some of the edges line up better than others. Then I'm simply just going to take some wood glue, apply it to the surface, and then I'm using just a piece of cardboard to smear the glue so I have a nice even coat along both faces. So next I'm putting a piece of plastic down so that way my part doesn't stick to my bench. You might want to put some kind of a slip sheet of some kind. I'm just using a cut off piece of a black contractor bag. Okay, now get this thing clamped up. I just used 2 in the horizontal direction, and then I actually added a block of wood and put another one in the middle to make sure this stayed flat. Okay, now we're going to leave this clamped up overnight, and we're going to come back to this tomorrow when the glue's dry. Okay, now we remove our clamps and start sanding. Make sure you got some fresh sandpaper and get at it, bud. Okay, now since I don't have any wood filler, I'm actually going to take some of the dust out of my sander and I'm going to mix it with the wood glue until I get a consistency that's like peanut butter, and this is going to work as a great wood filler. I'm doing this because even though I used a planer and clamps, my joint between these 2 boards is still not 100% perfect, and I want to fill that gap. I did this step twice. You might have to do this step 2 to 3, even 4 times because this wood putty mixture will shrink. Okay, now set that aside and let that dry. Next, I lay out the 5 2x6s that I'll use for the back. I put shims between them because I want gaps between these boards to match my bed. This is also a rough cut, approximately twice the length that I'll actually need because this will become 2 shelves. Then I take a height measurement, which will be the length of the supports that will be on the back of the shelf. Then I go to my table saw and I rip down 1x4s into 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch sticks, which I cut to length in my chop saw. Now I'm laying out where the locations of the supports will go on the back. If you notice, there's a board that's clamped to my table on the left. I've squared this board to the edge of my table, so I know I have 2 surfaces that are both straight and perpendicular. Now I'm going to clamp down this bottom board to my table, and I have shims between all of these boards. So now as I nail this assembly together, I can push all of the boards down into the left, and I know that I'll always have a perpendicular, parallel, and straight assembly. Okay. Now we're going to glue and nail these on the back. It's very important that you push these supports all the way to the bottom and make sure they're flush with the bottom of the back piece. I'll show you why in a minute. You'll notice that there's 4 supports I'm attaching to the back here. And again, that's because this is actually going to be 2 shelves, and I will cut this down right after I apply the supports onto the bottom shelf here. Some of you might be wondering why I'm adding a support on the bottom shelf after I did a glue up. Well, that's because I didn't have a biscuit joiner or any means of doweling these together, and I don't really trust a glue joint, so I'm just going to add supports to make sure that this doesn't break off. You'll also notice here that the supports are aligning with the back of the shelf. This is going to be very important. I don't want these supports to go all the way to the front face where they'll be very visible, but they do need to align with the back for the structural integrity of the shelf. All right, now I'm going to go over to my table saw and I'm going to cut these to their final width. Double and triple check your measurement at this stage. You wouldn't want to cut this wrong after putting in all this work assembling this. This is a good strategy to use when you're building furniture or other nice art pieces for your house. If you're doing any slatted work, a lot of times it makes sense to assemble the slats and then cut to the final width after the fact because you'll get a very, very straight cut. Whereas if you cut all these boards to their precise final length and then tried to put this together, it would be really hard to make those all line up perfectly at the edges. So This kind of gives you a little bit of room for error when you're assembling, and then when you put it through your saw, you'll have a perfectly square and straight line for your edges. Take note of how slow I'm pushing this through my saw. If you have a new blade laying around, use your sharpest and best blade for this. It is finished work, so yeah, push your piece through really slow. This is 2x material, so yeah, you don't want to force this through your saw, especially when you're cross-cutting in your table saw. So just be careful with this, go slow and easy, and you'll minimize splinters. Okay, we're really close to assembling this, but first we have to rip down some pieces of wood for our French cleat system that we'll use to hang this on the wall. So we're going to rip some pieces on a 45-degree angle in our table saw. I explained the French cleat system in much detail in our How to Build a Coat Rack video, so go check that one out if you haven't seen it before. I will link it at the end of this video. Okay, now I'm going to cut these 45-degree strips in my chop saw to length. The length of these should match the distance between the supports on the back of your shelf. Then, just like the rest of this build, I glue and nail these on the back, with the 45-degree rip facing downward. This is important. This is going to go at the top of the shelf. You want this at the very top, not the middle or the bottom. You want this at the top so this can hang properly. Okay, now we're finally going to attach the shelves to the bottom. I have here some 3-inch long construction screws. You will want a minimum of 1 inch to 1.5 inches of penetration into the vertical part of the shelf. This is where aligning those vertical supports to the bottom of your wall unit is extremely critical. Okay, so you'll want to pre-drill your holes as usual. Notice here how the screw patterns are staggered. This is also going to help with the strength and rigidity of your shelf and will allow it to support more weight. Make sure you give yourself about 1/4 inch of clearance to the edge of any wood when you're staggering the screws. Okay, now these are assembled. The bulk of the work here is done. We just have to finish and attach our light. So now we get sanding again with our orbital sander with some 220 grit sandpaper. Make sure to hit all the surfaces, including getting the saw blades off the end grain, and I grabbed a piece of hand sandpaper and got in all the cracks. Cover your work surface with a drop cloth or cardboard, and then I'll be using the same water-based polyurethane that I've used in my other projects with the satin finish. I've been really digging this polyurethane product from Behr. It dries really quickly, and it doesn't really change the characteristics of the wood too much. It gives it a little bit of a darker tone, but it won't yellow the wood as with some other polyurethanes. It'll take pines and different kinds of fir species and make them really, really yellow or orange, whereas this keeps the kind of lighter white tones. It doesn't totally wash out the wood, which I really, really like. This finish also leaves the wood feeling pretty natural. If you apply 3 coats or more, you'll definitely feel like it has a finish on it, but the wood in general has a pretty natural feel to it. It doesn't feel like totally glossed over after you apply this finish, as with some other ones, so maybe give this one a try for one of your next projects. So I'll apply 2 more coats to this for a total of 3 coats and allow it to dry for 2 to 3 hours between coats. Make sure you let the final coat dry overnight. All right, now let's get into how I attach the lights. So I have here a set of 2 lights that I bought on Amazon. These were around $30 or $40 for both of them, so not too expensive. They came with the cages that you see here, and they're just regular plug-in lights. So these will plug into a regular outlet, so you won't need any extensive electrical knowledge in order to set these up. You can simply screw them in and plug them in, and they're ready to go. I did, however, make a little modification to the wiring of this, which we'll get into in a few minutes. If you're interested to buy these same lights for your projects, I'll put a link down in the description where you can buy these on Amazon. All right, enough about the lights. I'll show you how I attached them now. So looking here, you can see that the wire is supposed to dangle in the front of this, and there's a little toggle switch in the middle of the wire which you can use to turn the light on and off. So I wanted to conceal this wire a little more, but I also wanted to have access to this toggle switch because I didn't want to rewire a switch onto this. So let's look at how I did that. So I started by removing the 2 cap nuts that are on the front of the light fixture. Make sure you don't lose these nuts, and then remove the back mounting plate. So if you were to mount this light fixture without making any other modifications to it, at this stage you would just screw this mounting plate wherever you want it and then reattach the light fixture to it and plug it in. If you don't have basic knowledge of electrical work, you might want to skip this next step. So inside of the fixture, there are some wire crimps. I want to cut and remove those and then pull the wire out of the bottom grommet because I want to feed this in from the back. So there was this annoying little clamp that was on the wire which would prevent the wire from being pulled out of the fixture. I grabbed a pair of channel locks and had to squeeze this in order to get it out. Now the wire just pulls right out the bottom. Then I had to decide exactly where I wanted to put my switch. After some thinking on it and looking at the switch, I decided I'm going to mount it to the back support piece right on the side. It coincidentally fit there perfectly. No, really, I didn't plan that. It literally fits perfectly flush in there. I was waiting for the lights while I was building this, and I thought I was going to actually route them into the bottom table, but that seemed like it wasn't going to work without actually cutting the wire and buying a whole separate switch system, and I didn't want to deal with that, so I'm going to mount it here. Okay, so the first thing I did here was mark out the locations of a hole and a notch that I'll have to cut in order to feed the wire through into the back. So you'll notice one side is a hole and the other side is a notch. That is because one side has a plug on it, and I won't be able to feed that end of the wire through a hole without cutting off this plug and reattaching it, and I just don't want to do that. It's going to be kind of janky with tape and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm not going to cut off the plug on this. I'm also making sure that the notch and the hole are not on the seam between the boards. If there's any movement at all for any reason, the most stress in the back support will be right at the seams, so you don't want to take away any wood at that location to compromise the strength of your piece. Now first I grabbed my jigsaw and cut out the notch. Sorry I blocked your view here. Next I drilled a hole after checking it with the diameter of the wire. Then I feed the wire through the hole and secure it in through the notch. I'm still not sure how I feel about this notch technique. It's kind of satisfactory. It's not excellent, I'll be honest, but it looks pretty good and it's concealed, which is what I really wanted. That was the goal here, so don't judge my notch. Next, I need to secure the wire and the switch to the unit, and I'll do that with these little wire staples. So I grab my hammer and I start securing the wire on the back. I needed a way to get the wire out from behind the unit down through the bottom of the shelf, so I cut a notch out of the bottom of the shelf on the back side where it won't be visible when it's hung on the wall. I use these instead of the wire clips because this part of the shelf will sit flush with the wall, and I can't have any protrusions here, so I have to hammer this in flush. It's very, very important that you cut the notch deep enough so when you hammer this staple in that you do not squish the wire. If the wire squishes, you could expose the copper core and it could lead to sparks and other bad stuff that you just don't want. So yeah, don't crush the wire when you hit this U-staple in. Make sure you have a little bit of room for play. So the next thing we have to do is grab our mounting plate and our tape measure, and we're going to center this mounting plate on the top panel on the back part of the unit. Take a look at this little ground screw that's sticking out the bottom. It's this green screw with the copper wire attached to it. That is the ground screw. You will not want to remove this screw, but it will prevent your mounting plate from sitting flush. So to fix this issue, I put the mounting plate back exactly where I want to mount it. Pay attention to the location of these two screws, which you'll use to mount the light to. They need to be aligned in the direction you want the light to face, so just make sure these aren't crooked. Then I grab my hammer and I give this green screw a nice tap just to leave a mark on the wood. Then I grab my drill and I remount a little hole about 1/4 inch deep, just a tiny divot in the wood so this screw can nestle right in there. Now I grab my drill with the Phillips driver in it and I mount the plate with the two screws that came with the light. Then I actually wrap the ground screw around the mounting screw. Any electricians out here, let me know if I did this wrong. I think I just need to ground to the fixture. There's no actual ground wire on the plug for this, so I think I did this right. Then I give the fixture a little test run because I couldn't resist the temptation to see what it looked like on there, but it's not actually ready to mount yet. First, we have to drill a hole to feed the wire in from the back. I drilled the hole as low as possible on the mounting plate, and that's because we have the French cleat on the back, and we want to make sure we have enough clearance to that. So yeah, I drilled the hole very, very low on here, so we have enough room to feed the wire through. Notice how we have about 2 inches from the bottom of the French cleat to the hole where we'll feed the wire through. Then I just hammer on the final wire staples. Check it out, it's almost done. Switch is all wired up, we just have to attach the light now. So now I grab the light fixture and open up this little bag that came with the light. It actually came with 2 wire nuts, so I believe this little modification I've made to feed the wire in from the back is actually not voiding any warranties. It's like they knew that someone might cut these wires and have to use these wire nuts to reattach the wires. So then I grabbed my wire strippers and I peeled off about a 3/8 inch long section of the wire to expose the copper core. Then I twisted the wires together, connecting the black wire to the black wire and the white wire to the white wire, so we have hot to hot and neutral to neutral. Then I screwed on both wire nuts. I slid the fixture over the screws that are on the mounting plate, and I attached these cap nuts that we saved from before. I unscrewed the pressure plate, then I grabbed the cage and put the pressure plate back on to hold it in place. This light actually has an adjustment where you can change the angle of it, but I want it to hang down at 90 degrees. And now this is complete and ready to be installed. So real quick, do that to the second one. And then we come in the bedroom and get ready to hang these. Now grab your handy laser level and find the studs. I just used a nail. You can use a stud finder. You can see a couple holes I left there in the wall, but those will thankfully be covered up. You will need to do a little math here. You can see the screws are off center of my French cleat, and that's because I don't want my table centered on the stud. I actually want it offset a little bit. So yeah, you might have to do a little bit of math to find the location of your stud and then where exactly you have to put your cleat. All there is to do next is just hang it up and plug it in. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you want more videos like this, then subscribe to our channel. We post all kinds of DIY and homesteading videos. If you're wondering where you can find this light, I have a link in the description to where you can buy it on Amazon. Last, on your screen here, you'll see some more videos from us that I think you'll really enjoy. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you in the next one.